Welcome to the special report of FreightWaves Now. I'm Craig Fuller here with Zach Strickland. This is an important day, breaking news. I'm here to declare the death and the end of the great freight recession. Don't rest in peace, by the way. Have a miserable time in hell. That's where you deserve to go. It has been miserable for all of us. It deserves to be haunted for eternity because it has been a miserable freight market. So I got to say, this is the end of the freight recession. I'm happy to declare it, Zach. Let's talk about why that's the case.
Yeah, I think, obviously the freight recession, for those of you that aren't familiar, the uninitiated, you don't know that the transportation sector has been operating relatively independent of the overall economy. It has been in a very depressed state. Rates have been down. Carriers have been losing money. The operators in the space have been losing a lot of money. And I think the important thing to note here is that this environment has been one of the longest and deepest that I can personally remember. I can't speak to the pre-regulation era.
So many people have talked about, executives. We saw Heartland's report that came out a few weeks ago, where Mike Jardine actually just said it was the worst freight recession in his 45-year history. We've seen, I think multiple people have talked about how this has gone on for 2.5 years. Yeah. It's been even more so than 2.5 years. It's gone on for a long time. Freight cycles, typically, when you have freight recessions, 6 months, 9 months is sort of a typical down slope of that market in terms of pretty challenging conditions. This one's going on a lot longer. Let's go to actually talk about why we are declaring the great freight recession dead. Let's pull these charts up.
Yeah, let's pull up the first one here, which is going to be our tender rejection index. And this, of course, I like the tender rejections. For those of you that don't know, this is the rate at which carriers are turning down requested load coverage from shippers. So these are their contracted accounts. Carriers do not like to say no to their contracted accounts unless they have to or have some other option that financially pushes them in that direction. And so when the rejection rates are below about 5 to 6%, and this is kind of a defining characteristic of a freight recession, when they're below about 5 to 6% on average in the national level, that is a very deflationary place. Carriers compete with each other. This is a very fragmented industry where there's thousands of carriers competing for the business. And when they have to compete with each other, that pushes rates down, and they will haul loads that lose money operationally.
Well, I think let's talk a little bit about what a freight recession is, just to back up for those that may not be aware of what the definition, or at least how we would describe it. Sure. It's when you have too much capacity in the market relative to demand. That's at the end of the day what happens.
Exactly.
And what happened over the last couple of years, we've talked about this extensively, is there's been an expansionary cycle in capacity, and that really happened all the way through really the early days of COVID, all the way until really 2023. And we've seen the market reset. But let's talk specifically about the data, because I think this is really important. So what we see here are 2 years. The blue chart right here, the blue section, is 2024's tender rejection. And remember, this is out of 100% of truckloads of whether a shipper is rejecting the loads or not. So this is, the blue is 2024. The pink here is 2023. A couple things I want to point out is, look at the delta we've had this year in rejections. It's been better, but things have been trending. But there was a big breakout that we saw in May.
Right.
Mid-May of last year, of 2023, was the low of the market. The market's been improving since, but hasn't broken out. But let's watch this. We saw that the freight market started to respond to normal market conditions. I had a talk yesterday with Derek Leathers, the CEO of Werner, which will soon be broadcast. And what he told me was, just like we've talked about, is they started to see normal seasonality. Road check week showed up. We started to see the market react to holidays. This is normal. Right here, tender rejections do take place because carriers have more demand at the end of a quarter, but they also take off time for the holidays. So we saw rejections really peak the way they should normally do, a little bit of peak, but much more muted. And then what we saw was really interesting around Labor Day, Zach, is a breakout that actually has been taking place. We saw almost a convergence of two markets, but look right here around Halloween. We saw it peak, or actually early October.
Yeah, it was because of the hurricanes, and we had the ILA strike as well.
Early October last year, we saw it peak. It continued to come up here, a little bit of market reset. It bounced about 5.2% and is now up above 6%. I'm gonna tell you why I'm excited about that. Is because it means that the market is reacting normally, that we're reacting to peak, And when we get above 6% is when we can start getting excited about the rest of the market. This is just one data point. Let's talk about the next part of the data.
I think one of the things I want to call out here is that November 8th, we talk about seasonality. We talk about peak season for the market. That's the holiday shipping season. You know, everybody's shipping the retail freight across the country. Normally doesn't really get going until the week before Thanksgiving in traditional years. The tender rejection rate, you see it last year, falling. We were at 3.4% last year. The difference between 3.4 and 6% is pretty huge.
Yeah, this is definitely showing signs. Remember all those imports. We talked about imports came in, and it really, the trucking market wasn't reacting to import activity. Intermodal was. Intermodal has been relatively strong, but trucking was not reacting to it. That's changed. Trucking is now responding to all of this volume of imports that have been put into the market, and it's actually, we're starting to see developments in the market that are actually proving that we are out or have moved out of the freight recession. The market.
This is only the second time since July of 22 that we've been above 6% too.
And you can actually see this in the spot rates. Let's go to the spot rate chart, because I think this is also really interesting to actually look at what's happening in spot rates. I want to show you this because I think this is really interesting. So we have 2022 in green. We have the pink line, which is 2023 again. And look at spot rates. This is spot rates net of fuel. So again, no fuel surcharge. It's the NTIL spot rate data that we take. It's just all line haul, doesn't have fuel incorporated in it. And what you see is that we kept a pretty tight band or range with last year's spot rate data or spot rates. And this year we've started to see a breakout. What I think is really exciting about that is the start of the freight recession was really March of 2022. And we saw the market really bottom in 22 down here, but it actually got worse in 23. What we're seeing now is this breakout that I think is incredibly interesting, is we're seeing it inflect. We're seeing spot rates actually inflect in November above 22's numbers, which makes the comps a lot easier as we go forward. And we should see a breakout from here on out. But we're not done with this, because people will say this is just peak season. I'm going to make the case about why this is not just peak season, but I think you actually have a map that you want to show us before we do that.
Yeah. I mean, to start this off, like, I think this is the spot rate trend over the last couple of years. We actually have been talking about the bottom of the market starting in May.
That was May of last year. That was last year. See that right there? And it's gotten better. And a lot of people, we've been talking about the freight recession recovery. The market has been recovering. It's just been pretty anemic.
Slow, really, really slow crawl. And then throughout the year, even though spot market the volatility wasn't there, the important thing about this one that I think makes us so on alert is the speed and the jump.
It's the direction. There is something. So this is, again, this is not the election. I want to be very clear. What we're seeing right here is not related directly to the election. The election impact is going to happen starting in the first quarter. We'll talk about that. But let's go to the map.
Yeah, this is the thing that actually triggered me. When I came in, or when I opened my computer and my sonar this morning, this is the first thing that I saw. Now, this is a map that tells you where rates are moving in the United States by market level. Blue, increasing rates. So percentage of rates increasing significantly at that. So we've got our data science team that says statistically significant increasing. All of this being blue, I have not seen this since we started this map.
It is amazingly blue. Not a lot of, I mean, you have a little bit of pink. Not a lot of red at all. In fact, I don't see a single district that's got deep red. You've got a little bit of pink right here, up here in the Great Lakes, but nothing really of significance.
Normally we see regions, like a lot of these little pockets
of regions.
This is
the spot rates actually increasing. And remember, when we look at rate, a lot of rate is psychology driven. So you need the tender rejections to move first, which they are saying that it's moving. It needs to be confirmed with spot rates, and we're seeing that actually fall through across the country. This is not just a market pocket problem. This is an entire U.S. opportunity. Spot rates are increasing. That will increase the psychology. And how does this play out for shippers, Zach?
Yeah, well, one of the things we monitor too is the contract rates, and we're in bid season right now. And the fact that a lot of these contracts have been driving down so fast for so long. We have some lane level information. We've seen some of these contraction go 20 to 30% over the last 2 years. Contract rates have been coming down. You saw the spot rate chart. It's been coming up. So underneath that, we have this this almost collision course of spot rate and contract
that rate delta.
Yep.
And
It has
then
been
Sonar, we
shrinking.
don't, unfortunately, didn't prepare that today, but rates.usa will tell you about that compression. It is compressing. This is bid cycle. This is RFPs. Shippers should be on the defense.
Absolutely.
I said back in June of 2020, I tweeted this, that shippers should prepare to lock in contract rates today at higher levels. This is, remember, June of 2020. This is when the freight market was starting its recovery. And it was still very early. Our high frequency data was revealing this. And I warned shippers to go ahead and lock in those contract rates. And I'm seeing that again. Now, here's the temptation shippers are going to have. They're going to get these RFPs in. And the psychology of the market is resetting, but a lot of those RFPs already been prepared by carriers. They had a psychology going into it. I think what I would recommend for shippers is to make sure that they have some level of flexibility in those. Don't go for the cheapest carriers that are in the market, but you also need to use data to understand where the market's headed. And I think this bullish recovery is much stronger than what we've talked about. We've been talking about the fact that this could be a slower recovery. I actually think it's incredibly bullish. Let me make a case on why I think this is, and this is all changed after the election, by the way. This is election related. There's a couple of data points I want to go. Let's go to the next slide here because I think this is pretty important. So not a lot of folks are talking about it that should be talking about it. So a couple of years ago, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration rolled out the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. And basically it was through multiple stages where they said if you failed a drug or alcohol test and you weren't in compliant, that you would basically, you would have a period of time to resolve that. And if you didn't, you could be taken off the road. So Adam Wingfield, a trucking driver expert, has actually said something pretty astounding. But look at this, 177,000 truck drivers are risk being revoked, having their CDLs revoked. There's approximately 3.5 million CDLs in the United States total. We don't know how many of those are active, let's just be clear. But even if it's 2% or 5%, in a market like this, that could be massive and could be substantial.
Sharp changes have big influence.
Because the market is all about the incremental piece of capacity, so that's the conditions in the market. And we talk about a big churning out of capacity like this, that could be pretty massive. There's also reasons to look at other things that are happening in the market that will continue to carry this freight recovery forward. We've talked a lot about throughout our Freightonomics and throughout our State of Freight shows about the election. It was a landslide election by most people's definitions, both in popular, unexpected, by the way, popular vote.
Questioning the media polls there.
Well, I think the prediction markets actually were pretty clear on this. But one of the things that we've said before we got on air, you and I talked before the election, and by the way, Wall Street has confirmed this. If you've looked at the transports over the last week, they're up something like 12%. I mean, some of these LTL carriers, I think Oda Million was up 17%. But what we're seeing is that Wall Street is betting on the Trumponomics and the recovery that could bring for trucking, and it will favor the industrials and particularly U.S.-based trucking markets. And let me explain why that's the case, because there's a couple of really important things. One is Donald Trump's tariffs. The tariffs that he is promoting favor U.S. manufacturing, but it also favors import surge as companies pre-stock for inventories for the threat of it. I saw, yesterday, Steve Madden, the shoe company that was made famous in the Wolf of Wall Street, came out and said that they have been planning to actually move 40% of their production out of China. And they had this plan before the election that they actually executed. So a lot of shippers have been planning about the potential of tariffs and are actually executing that right now, because it is an absolute certainty that trade policy will be front and center of Donald Trump's term when he gets into office next year. So whether that takes place in the very first thing he does or takes a couple of months, it's going to happen. Shippers can expect it, and they should be preparing now for that impact. That means you're bringing a lot more imports in. You're pre-stocking and bringing inventory into your warehouses. That will bring products into our economy, bring it into distribution centers. The other thing is the long-term impacts of that means that domestic sourcing and having bumper stock here in the U.S. is much more likely than it has been in the past. We also should see over time a modal shift between container freight and surface. So trucking and rail become more prosperous because you're not sourcing as many goods from China, particularly if we're talking a 60% tariff. So I think that's incredibly bullish for trucking. Let's talk a little bit about capacity. 20% of the trucking driver population in America, this is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, are immigrants. Now, the vast majority of those immigrants are here legally. They're hardworking. I am a pro-immigration person.
Right.
But let's be completely frank here. A portion of those drivers are not documented and are here illegally under Donald Trump's definitions. And if you don't think that's happening, if you've never been in trucking and you don't think trucking companies, particularly small operators, are not going to take advantage of the opportunity to do things that are not completely compliant, then you haven't been paying attention. The whole joke on the whole meme about Strong Serge, the song solo, is the same thing we're talking about here, is indefinitely that's going to take some labor out of the trucking market, some driver population of the trucking market, because trucking is a wonderful job for people who don't have a lot of other opportunities, particularly if you're trying to stay under the radar, because you're out there remote, you're not likely to do it. They can use international CDLs. And I talked to someone completely who, I'm not going to talk about it because he completely talked about off record, but he told me that what they actually see is a lot of driver's licenses. When the people are registering their trucks, they're using January 1st of the year because they don't actually know their birth date. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they actually are using other people's credentials to do it, and it's not getting tracked. Now, again, we don't know how big that number is, but I have to believe that it's at least some percent that actually could pull some capacity out.
Enough percent, kind of like this one. It's enough to make a difference.
These are just factors in the capacity.
When you have these chunks of supply coming offline, that can have a big
absolutely. These are just factors. And let's talk a little bit more about what we should expect from the Trumponomics next year. Is tax cuts, which will come in income tax that will drive consumption. We'll have likely corporate tax cuts as well that will drive commercial investment and developments and investment in our economy. We will also likely see a change in things like bonus depreciation, which accelerate purchasing. The heavy-duty tax, the heavy-duty penalty that was implemented by the Biden administration to basically try to get rid of diesel trucks off the road probably goes away. There's, the 2027 emissions engine changes are all this.
Which was realistically not that implementable.
No, it's not. But all of this stuff gets reversed, and that means that the concern about a capacity build going into 27 is less likely. The other thing is, if we do see an aggressive deportation of folks here, is that will take a lot of labor supply out of the other industries which trucking competes with. Things like construction, things like hospitality, things like food work, all of that will take some supply out of the market, and that could significantly compete with trucking jobs, which means trucking, we may see a pretty substantial capacity shortage like we saw back in 2020.
So do you think that this has something like, again, 2020 is kind of that COVID pandemic era. Does this not feel a little bit more like the 2018 environment?
Absolutely it does. But I do think what is this downturn has been so significant, and that back in 2017, there's a lot, that was Trump's first term in office. Tax cuts, trade policy, all of those things did drive a lot of the freight economy. 2018 was a great time to be in trucking, at least the first half of it was. You also had the ELD mandate that took place that actually added a lot of incremental capacity. To your point, we started out in 2018, late 17, 2018 were fantastic parts for the trucking economy, probably the best that we've seen up until that point. And then the back half of 18 and 2019 was pretty miserable. And a lot of that was related to inventory pre-stocking.
So do you think that we see a little bit of a bubble here?
Well, look, I think we see a change in direction and change of the guard. How long does this last, I think, is anyone's guess. And I'm not going to venture a guess. I think what I am most concerned about and what I'm most interested about is a change in the direction of the market. And I think whether or not some of these policy implications have longer term implications to the freight economy, a year, 2 years, 3 years out, it doesn't matter for this freight recession, because I think we can bookmark the great freight recession. We can declare it dead, and you die like a miserable dog.
What about January and February? Are you
Well,
not
look,
concerned?
January has always been a really interesting time of
Yeah.
year. I mean, what we have seen the last couple of years is January actually hasn't been soft the way we expected.
Right.
In fact, when we looked at the data, we're always surprised at how well January
Couple of weeks
performed.
deep.
Now, February's been a pretty miserable year.
Standard February.
Yeah, it's a pretty miserable time of year. I think, though, there's a lot of enthusiasm among business leaders, a lot of anxiety about the election, and whether or not people voted for or wanted Harris to win or wanted Trump to win, it doesn't matter. It was the anxiety of something bad happening.
Right.
And I think we all feared the worst outcome would have been a contested election. The fact that it was a landslide in either way is absolutely the worst. Like, if it was a contested election, I think it would have been miserable for everybody because we would have spent the next 6 months arguing about whether it was a legit election or not on both sides. The fact that it was it was basically a massive win, means that we can move on with our lives. It means businesses can make investments,
make decisions.
They can think about the future. One of the nice things we do have with Donald Trump is that we know his playbook. If anything, he's very transparent about what he thinks, says things off the cuff, like policies done, used to be done on Twitter, for better or worse. And there's things you love about Donald Trump. I do think this administration will actually be surrounded some of the more rational actors, I think, involving business innovators. Elon Musk is arguably the most innovative leader of our time, just in terms of what he's accomplished in his life. And I think having that around will actually be very bullish for a business-oriented economy dealing with some of these significant issues. Regardless of that, I think if you're in freight, you should feel great about the direction of the market in the end of the worst and most miserable cycle that we've had in, well, at least in my lifetime.
Right. And there you have it. I mean, I think you've kind of wrapped it up in a bow there, but today and probably for the next couple of months, we're probably going to have a much more active environment.
Oh, it's going to be incredible.
Yeah.
I think, to your point, we're looking at this from at least for 6 months. I think we have a period because we're not going to see a capacity expansion. We're going to see continuing contraction in the freight market. That's something that's a little different about 2017, 2018, is that what happened going into the 2017 and 2018 period related to tariffs and tax cuts is what we saw in that period were a couple of things. We saw actually capacity expansion happen at the very same time that we saw this new level of stimulus in the freight economy, in the trucking economy particularly. That isn't going to happen this time around, is that we're actually seeing a massive contraction of capacity related to all of the issues that have existed over the last couple of years, and just the fact that trucking as an industry has been really torn up. I think it's going to significantly change, and I don't think we'll see an expansionary cycle. So I actually think, will this last for 18, 24, 36 months? I don't know. I think it's too early to say.
For sure.
But I do think you can feel incredibly bullish about going into 25. And I would say shippers, if you're thinking about those routing guides and you're thinking about those bids, be very cautious to just lock in the cheapest carrier, because those routing guides may fail, and you may be stuck paying very high spot rates to get your freight covered. I would also use data. And this is not just a commercial for Sonar, but I think any data that you can use to confirm what's happened in the market is going to make you a better formed buyer of transportation services. We would argue that high frequency data is the most important types of data because it gives you a real-time reflection on what's happening. And the volatility of the market, the direction change is so massive that it's not going to show up in lagging data. And particularly government data is almost useless in this kind of period, because what government data tells you is what happened 6 months ago. It's not very useful for forward-looking sentiment. Wall Street agrees with what we've been saying, is that the trucking market in particular and the railroads are about to have a fantastic 2025 because of all of these developments. So you either trust Wall Street or you don't. At the end of the day, the smart money is betting on a recovery, and I'm with them.
All right. So, I mean, I think you've kind of put it all in a nice package. It's going to be a volatile environment moving forward in 2025.
It's going to be a great environment.
And
volatility has a negative connotation. It's going to be volatile in terms of supply chain routing guides.
Sourcing.
Well, sourcing is going to be volatile for sure. Capacity routing guides are subject to failure. We haven't seen that. But in terms of the carriers, and let's just be completely frank here. At the end of the day, if we don't have a healthy trucking market, whether it's the drivers or the carriers or this entire ecosystem, it serves nobody's interest. It is in the interest of everyone to have a healthy trucking market, even when it means that shippers may have to pay a little bit more. It means that you can invest in capital, you can invest in people, and that's what we need. And that ensures the health and security of this industry.
Well, stability from a shipping standpoint.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you want these companies viable. I think every shipper would admit they want some viability.
Right.
And I think the important thing is this is going to inject a lot of additional investment in the industry. This recovery is so welcome. As a trucker who has a lot of empathy for the carriers and the brokers and the drivers that are out there, which is interesting, you can fit all three of those and shippers.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see some level of optimism here. And I think this is happening. And I got to say one thing, Zach.
All right.
Let's let it rain here. So
oh my God.
It's time to rain, baby. Money's coming in. It is going to be the best freight market that we've seen in at least 5 years. Well, take that back, because COVID was a pretty damn good freight market. But at least 3 years, and it could even be better than that if it's sustainable. Remember, government stimulus is not coming in terms of adding loans to add new capacity. Government stimulus is coming in to the overall economy to drive demand. That is so much more powerful.
Yeah, that's big. That's a big statement that you just ended up with right there.
Let it rain, baby.
All right.
There's nothing quite like fall in Chattanooga. The beautiful weather, the gorgeous scenery, and bringing 1,400 of your favorite freight friends right here into downtown. We broke records last year at the Future Freight Festival 2023. This year, we're taking it up yet another notch. You can find us all over the city from November 19th through the 21st, like at the iconic Walnut Street Walking Bridge. We'll be here for Late Night Networking with Lean Solutions Group. We'll be right here at the Tennessee Aquarium for our reception, and of course, the JV Hunt Party. Who wants to miss it? If you haven't bought your tickets yet, you can still do that. Go to live.freightwaves.com. We want to see you here in Chattanooga, November 19th through the 21st for F3 2024.
So thank you for coming into this special report. Really excited to have you. And we'll be even more excited to see you at F3. It's going to be a fantastic, exciting time. We're going to talk about not just this story, but all of the others that could really impact 2025. That takes place in Chattanooga, Tennessee on November 19th through the 21st. Please join us at F3. It is going to be a fantastic party. It's going to be a fantastic event. And this will be an exciting time. We're going to have a lot of relief for the miserable 2024. We're going to put it to rest. We're going to bury the great freight recession. And we're going to party celebrating 2025, Zach.
Stone Temple Pilots, too.
Stone Temple Pilots are coming. We've got some fantastic speakers. We've got Shelley Simpson. We have Doug Wagner. We have all sorts of just really interesting talks.
I mean, I expect the energy level there is going to be pretty strong.
And David Parker, one of the most enthusiastic CEOs on the freight market, is also coming to talk. I can name all the speakers, but it's going to be fantastic. Really exciting times. By the way, Business Wars, the host, David Brown, do you ever listen to the show?
It's
the best podcast. Yeah. It's about two competing businesses. He's going to come and we're going to have a sit down and talk about just different things in freight. One of the things we're going to talk about is the labor versus business. Talk about a major business war that is shaping the future of this market. We're going to really dive into it.
Anybody in the unions, watch out.
Yeah, but also businesses. You're going to be faced with this reality. That's not going away.
Right.
So see us there.